Children of the Dust. Link, John Pilger. Published 28 May 2007. As the Israeli army attempts to imprison an entire nation, it is the youngest who suffer most. Half of all Palestinians killed in the past 6 years are children. Israel is destroying any notion of a state of Palestine and is being allowed to imprison an entire nation. That is clear from the latest attacks on Gaza, whose suffering has become a metaphor for the tragedy imposed on the peoples of the Middle East and beyond. These attacks, reported on Channel 4 News, were targeting key militants of Hamas and the Hamas infrastructure. The BBC described a clash between the same militants and Israeli F-16 aircraft. Consider one such clash. The militant's car was blown to pieces by a missile from a fighter bomber. Who were these militants? In my experience, all the people of Gaza are militant in their resistance to their jailer and tormentor. As for the Hamas infrastructure, this was the headquarters of the party that won last year's democratic elections in Palestine. To report that would give the wrong impression. It would suggest that the people in the car and all the others over the years, the babies and the elderly who have also clashed with fighter bombers, were victims of a monstrous injustice. It would suggest the truth. Some say, said the Channel 4 reporter, that Hamas has courted this attack. Perhaps he was referring to the rockets fired at Israel from within the prison of Gaza which killed no one. Under international law, an occupied people has the right to use arms against the occupier's forces. This right is never reported. The Channel 4 reporter referred to an endless war, suggesting equivalence. There is no war. There is resistance among the poorest, most vulnerable people on earth to an enduring, illegal occupation imposed by the world's fourth largest military power, whose weapons of mass destruction range from cluster bombs to thermonuclear devices, bankrolled by the superpower. In the past 6 years alone, wrote the historian Ellen Papp, Israeli forces have killed more than 4,000 Palestinians, half of them children. Consider how this power works. According to documents obtained by United Press International, the Israelis once secretly funded Hamas as a direct attempt to divide and dilute support for a strong, secular PLO Palestine Liberation Organization by using a competing religious alternative, in the words of a former CIA official. Today, Israel and the US have reversed this ploy and openly back Hamas's rival, Fatah, with bribes of millions of dollars. Israel recently secretly allowed 500 Fatah fighters to cross into Gaza from Egypt, where they had been trained by another American client, the Cairo dictatorship. The Israelis' aim is to undermine the elected Palestinian government and ignite a civil war. They have not quite succeeded. In response, the Palestinians forged a government of national unity, of both Hamas and Fatah. The latest attacks are aimed at destroying this. With Gaza secured in chaos and the West Bank walled in, the Israeli plan, wrote the Palestinian academic Kamber Baltzer, is a Hobbesian vision of an anarchic society, truncated, violent, powerless, destroyed, cowed, ruled by disparate militias, gangs, religious ideologues and extremists, broken up into ethnic and religious tribalism and co-opted collaborationists. Look to the Iraq of today. On 19th of May, The Guardian received this letter from Omar Jabri al-Sarafah, a Ramallah resident. Land, water and air are under constant sight of a sophisticated military surveillance system that makes Gaza like the Truman Show, he wrote. In this film every Gazan actor has a predefined role and the Israeli army behaves as a director. The Gaza Strip needs to be shown as what it is, an Israeli laboratory backed by the international community where human beings are used as rabbits to test the most dramatic and perverse practices of economic suffocation and starvation. The remarkable Israeli journalist Gideon Levy has described the starvation sweeping Gaza's more than 1.25 million inhabitants and the thousands of wounded, disabled and shell-shocked people unable to receive any treatment. The shadows of human beings roam the ruins. They only know the Israeli army will return and they know what this will mean for them: more imprisonment in their homes for weeks, more death and destruction in monstrous proportions. Whenever I have been in Gaza, I have been consumed by this melancholia, as if I were a trespasser in a secret place of mourning. Skeins of smoke from wood fires hang over the same Mediterranean Sea that free peoples know, but not here. Along beaches that tourists would regard as picturesque trudge the incarcerated of Gaza. Lines of sepia figures become silhouettes, marching at the water's edge, through lapping sewage. The water and power are cut off, yet again, when the generators are bombed, yet again. Iconic murals on walls pockmarked by bullets commemorate the dead, such as the family of 18 men, women and children who clashed with a 500-pound American-Israeli bomb dropped on their block of flats as they slept. Presumably, they were militants. More than 40% of the population of Gaza are children under the age of 15. Reporting on a 4-year field study in occupied Palestine for the British Medical Journal, Dr. Derek Summerfield wrote that 2/3 of the 621 children killed at checkpoints, in the street, on the way to school, in their homes, died from small arms fire, directed in over half of cases to the head, neck and chest, the sniper's wound. A friend of mine with the United Nations calls them children of the dust. Their wonderful childishness, their rowdiness and giggles and charm, belie their nightmare. I met Dr. Khalid Darlan, a psychiatrist who heads one of several children's community health projects in Gaza. He told me about his latest survey. The statistic I personally find unbearable, he said, is that 99.4% of the children we studied suffer trauma. Once you look at the rates of exposure to trauma, you see why. 99.2% of the study group's homes were bombarded, 97.5% were exposed to tear gas, 96.6% witnessed shootings, 95.8% witnessed bombardment and funerals, almost a quarter saw family members injured or killed. He said children as young as 3 faced the dichotomy caused by having to cope with these conditions. They dreamt about becoming doctors and nurses, then this was overtaken by an apocalyptic vision of themselves as the next generation of suicide bombers. They experienced this invariably after an attack by the Israelis. For some boys, their heroes were no longer football players, but a confusion of Palestinian martyrs, and even the enemy, because Israeli soldiers are the strongest and have Apache gunships. Shortly before he died, Edward said bitterly reproached foreign journalists for what he called their destructive role in stripping the context of Palestinian violence, the response of a desperate and horribly oppressed people, and the terrible suffering from which it arises. Just as the invasion of Iraq was a war by media, so the same can be said of the grotesquely one-sided conflict in Palestine. As the pioneering work of the Glasgow University Media Group shows, television viewers are rarely told that the Palestinians are victims of an illegal military occupation. The term, occupied territories, is seldom explained. Only 9% of young people interviewed in the UK know that the Israelis are the occupying force and the illegal settlers are Jewish. Many believe them to be Palestinian. The selective use of language by broadcasters is crucial in maintaining this confusion and ignorance. Words such as terrorism, murder, and savage, cold-blooded killing describe the deaths of Israelis, almost never Palestinians. There are honorable exceptions. The kidnapped BBC reporter Alan Johnston is one of them. Yet, amidst the avalanche of coverage of his abduction, no mention is made of the thousands of Palestinians abducted by Israel, many of whom will not see their families for years. There are no appeals for them. In Jerusalem, the Foreign Press Association documents the shooting and intimidation of its members by Israeli soldiers. In one 8-month period, as many journalists, including the CNN bureau chief in Jerusalem, were wounded by the Israelis, some of them seriously. In each case, the FPA complained. In each case, there was no satisfactory reply. A censorship by omission runs deep in Western journalism on Israel, especially in the US. Hamas is dismissed as a terrorist group sworn to Israel's destruction, and one that refuses to recognize Israel and wants to fight, not talk. This theme suppresses the truth.
Okay, I'm back again. This is about Ariel Sharon and about Israel and Zionism. That was Children of the Dust by John Pilger, a documentary director and producer and so on. I feel Ariel Sharon could be considered another Hitler. The only difference is that with Hitler, it was the Aryan race that he wanted to take over the world with. and he wanted to get rid of the Jews. The reason he wanted to get rid of the Jews is because he was part Jewish. And he figured that he could use them to piss off the people enough so they would want to kill him. Now, the law was anyone with more than 12% Jewish blood was a Jew. And if you had 12% or less, you were okay. Primarily because Hitler was 12% Jewish. Anyway, I've talked to people who had relatives in Palestine back when Israel became a country. Before Israel, Palestinians and the Jews got along well. There was no problem with the Jews that came to Israel from Germany and Eastern Europe. The problem was when the Zionists got involved. And I want to talk more about that, but before I do that, there was a lot of stuff on Ariel Sharon. Most of it showed him as a asshole, as a racist, and religion-wise. He didn't like Arabs. Anybody that was non-Jewish, he didn't like, including Christians. What the Christian right doesn't realize is that the Zionists don't like Christians. Even though there's a few Christians that are Zionists. At least they think they are. But there was something from Al Jazeera which I was thinking about putting on, but then you would say, well, you can't trust Al Jazeera, it's Arabic. The only thing is, Al Jazeera is more accurate than most of what we get in this country, especially the mainstream media. And then I looked at PBS, and actually PBS and Al Jazeera agreed on everything. And I looked at the Real News Network. And today, 45 minutes of Democracy Now! Was devoted to Ariel Sharon. And it had Noam Chomsky and a lot of other people on there. And I was thinking I could use that, but it's too long. What I'm thinking about doing is doing a show on Ariel Sharon later on with more of the stuff from these people. But I decided to use the Real News. It's a little bit longer than Al Jazeera and PBS. Real News is independent media. And so I figured it'd probably be about the best one to use. But I saw very little good said about Ariel Sharon. Of course, he's been praised by our government, but our government is paid by a Zionist. Now, I don't want anything I say to be thought of as against the Jews. In fact, I'm willing to bet most of the Jews don't like the Zionists. And it's the Zionists that cause the problem, not the Jews. And I want that understood. A lot of Jews don't care what religion you are. In fact, they're probably better than the Christian right. Of course, the Jewish right is like the Christian right, except they don't like Christians or Arabs. And then you got the Arab right, like Al-Qaeda, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Dubai, and a few other Arabic countries who don't like anybody but people that are there part of Muslim religion. In fact, Saudi Arabia had a lot to do with 9/11. But money talks. It's not what you do, it's what you pay. Anyway, this is the Real News Network. Sharon's Legacy.
Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Kayla Rivara in Baltimore. Former Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon has died at the age of 85. Since 2006, Sharon has been in a coma on life support in a hospital outside of Tel Aviv. Among other positions, Sharon was Israel's prime minister from 2000 to 2006, as well as the Israeli defense minister from 1981 to 1983, and remains a controversial figure today. Sharon has been praised for withdrawing Israeli forces from the Gaza Strip in 2005. Critics, however, say that he was the key architect of the Israeli apartheid state. They also note an Israeli inquiry that found Sharon bore, quote, personal responsibility for his role in the massacres at the Sabra and Shatila Palestinian refugee camps in Lebanon in 1982. It is estimated that almost 1,000 civilians were killed. Now joining us is Shir Hever. Shir is an economic researcher at the Alternative Information Center, a Palestinian-Israeli organization active in Jerusalem and Beit Sahar. Welcome to the Real News.
Hi, Kayla. Good to be here.
So, Shir, who was Ariel Sharon and what is his legacy?
Ariel Sharon is a figure with quite a long history. He's been involved in so many things, it's a bit hard to list all of them. He's been a soldier in every one of Israel's wars, and like many Israeli officers, made the jump from military service to politics and became and reached the highest possible positions in the Israeli political system. He fought in the war of 1948, in which Israel was founded. But I think the most well-known military activity that he was involved in was the massacre in the village of Kibia in 1953, in which he commanded the notorious Unit 101. This unit was charged with sort of reprisal attacks or revenge attacks against random Palestinian villages in response to attacks against Israel. And the unit specialized in attacking villages where they killed innocent civilians. In the village of Kibia, over 60 people were murdered under Sharon's command. Later on, Sharon continued to rise in the military rank, and command larger forces. And he was a very disobedient officer. He on several occasions, he disobeyed a direct order. And what's interesting is that despite all that, he kept on advancing. He kept on getting more praise and more responsibilities. David Ben-Gurion, Israel's first prime minister, called him a pathological liar, and nevertheless continued to use him because it was convenient to employ so much violence in order to terrorize Palestinian villages and to terrorize nearby countries. In the war of against Lebanon, in which he played a very crucial role, some argue that he actually deceived the Israeli government itself into getting more committed into that war than they initially planned while he was Minister of Defense. He was very much involved in orchestrating and especially not in preventing the Sabra and Shatila massacre. Following that massacre, which Sharon simply said is nothing but Arabs killing Arabs. He didn't think there was anything problematic about this massacre. But he stood in front of the committee, and the committee recommended that he should never be allowed to be a Minister of Defense again. And nevertheless, he became not only Minister of Defense, but he became Prime Minister. And in Israel, a Prime Minister has all the portfolios and then can divide them to others. So he was, for a brief time, also Minister of Defense again. And as Prime Minister, he continued the escalation of violence against Palestinians in the course of the Second Intifada and then the withdrawal from Gaza. So he has quite a long list of things. I will stop here because knowing that I'm not really doing justice to all of his military involvements and all the people that he killed or ordered killed. But it should also be said that in addition to that, he was one of Israel's most corrupt politicians. He was involved in several scandals regarding bribery, money laundering, and so on. And just as the investigation against him was about to go public and go to a very critical stage, he had a stroke. And at that moment, he went into a coma, and his political career was over. That actually enabled his political party, Kadima, which he formed, to run in the next election without having to face all of the repercussions of a criminal investigation against the prime minister.
Shir, I wanted to talk about how Ariel Sharon was remembered before that stroke and read a quote from the New York Times, which said, quote, "He was believed to be preparing for further territorial concessions to establish a Palestinian state when he became ill." What is your response to this?
Sharon was anything but very intelligent. He was one of the most bright politicians that Israel had, and he always believed, or at least acted as if he believes that he knows what's best, regardless of the orders that he gets from above. And the interesting thing is that while he was just a soldier, he kept doing things his own way, even when his commanding officers thought that he was wrong. But when he rose in rank and became prime minister, he tried to concentrate authority around the prime minister's office. Now, the Israeli occupation of the Palestinian territories has been very chaotic at the stage when he took power as prime minister. Officers, you could say maybe they were inspired by his own example, have done whatever they wanted to do. And Sharon promoted the construction of the wall of separation in the West Bank and the withdrawal from the Gaza Strip in order to enable Israel to better control that territory. But being bright as he was, he also managed to sell that policy as if he's promoting the peace process, as if he's a moderate prime minister. And his one of his chief advisors, Dov Weissglass, said the withdrawal from Gaza is putting the peace process in formaldehyde. That means that Israel is not really giving up the occupation, not really giving up control even of the Gaza Strip itself. It's taken a unilateral move, but it would seem as if Israel is willing to evacuate from territory that it conquered, and that would create the image that Israel is willing to proceed on the peace process. Well, of course, the Palestinians are not. And this was really the plan of Sharon. And in a speech that he gave to the Israeli Knesset, he said, we need to withdraw from Gaza because otherwise the Jews are no longer a majority in the land control, in the territory controlled by Israel. But what he didn't say is that even after the withdrawal, Israel continues to control Gaza, continues to levy taxes there, continues to impose a siege. That means that Jews are indeed no longer a majority in Israel.
Unfortunately, we are out of time for this segment, but please join us for part 2 of our conversation with Shir Hever on the legacy of Ariel Sharon. Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Kayla Rivara in Baltimore, and we're continuing our conversation with Shir Hever on the legacy of Ariel Sharon, the former Israeli prime minister. Thank you for joining us again, Shir.
Thank you, Kayla.
What did Ariel Sharon symbolize, and what made him such a historic figure?
Sharon symbolized different things to different people. Most of all, he symbolized the most dark aspect of Israeli society and the Zionist movement to Palestinians, to Lebanese people who suffered under the attacks that he orchestrated. And in many ways, he is Israel's second worst war criminal in the history of Israel after Ben Gurion, Israel's first prime minister, who orchestrated the Nakba, the deportation of the majority of the population of Palestine. But Sharon was somebody who was symbolized as a brilliant military leader and conniving politician with a great ability to lie. And it was to a point of extreme where people found it, even inside Israel, some people found it surprising that he's able to keep on resurfacing and gaining more authority and more positions of power after having been caught in additional scandals and additional lies. There was a common talk amongst Israeli leftists when I grew up in Israel that when the day comes that Sharon will ever become prime minister, that means we have to leave the country. That is like the red line, that Israel is no more livable. And yet, when it actually came, nobody actually left the country, or very few people did, because of that. Because it somehow, memories tend to fade. People tend to forgive and consider the new image of Sharon that he adopted before becoming prime minister as a more moderate person. Although we should remember that he became prime minister by provoking a very violent confrontation with Palestinians on the Al-Aqsa Mosque while Ehud Barak was prime minister. And this provocation was one of the main reasons that led to the outbreak of the Second Intifada. And with the outbreak of the Second Intifada, he was able to become prime minister in the elections because he was Mr. Security.
What is the significance of his death, and how will he be remembered, and by who?
Sharon's death is somewhat of an anticlimax because he was in a coma for 7 years now, and this is something that was rather unexpected. People thought that when he had a stroke that he's going to die quite shortly, but I think the family insisted on keeping him on life support as much as possible. But I have to say that even though Sharon symbolizes so much of the darkest aspects of Israeli society and the Zionist movement, to me, I nevertheless mourn the fact that he died. The fact that he died, because there was also a great hope amongst leftists, amongst critical voices, that Sharon will be tried for war crimes. Being the second most violent or the second most deadly war criminal in Israel's history, he would be a prime candidate to stand in front of the International Court in The Hague and to answer for the crimes that he committed. And this is something that, of course, will not be possible after he died. And in many ways, a lot of people were hoping for this sort of symbolic trial to symbolize that you cannot perpetrate such terrible crimes without paying a price for them, without being accountable for them, are severely disappointed.
Ariel Sharon formed the Kadima party and referred to it as centrist. And Shir, I wanted to get your response to that.
This is another one of the very brilliant ploys that Sharon made, because the reason that he formed this party was because the Likud party was not willing to go ahead with the withdrawal from Gaza. And this was mostly a symbolic thing. Sharon understood that, symbolism aside, the strategic thing to do for Israel is to withdraw the colonies from Gaza and put the Gaza Strip under siege. And the Likud party was not willing to go along with that. Sharon formed his own party. But this is not a party about promoting the peace process or about recognizing the rights of Palestinians. It was a party about being more pragmatic and practical in making the occupation more sustainable. But because he positioned it within Israel's very strange political system to the left of the Likud party, it made it seem as if it's a centrist party. The person who has to thank the most to Sharon for this movement is Tzipi Livni, who is currently Israel's Minister of Justice, because she became the head of that party, not immediately after Sharon, but after Ehud Olmert, who was Prime Minister after Sharon. And Tzipi Livni continues to be considered by the international media as a centrist or even as a moderate Israeli politician, because she's associated with this party, because this party was made to be seen by Sharon as if it is a party that is willing to promote the peace process, and this is despite the fact that we have so many evidence, so much proof that everything that this party has ever done was actually to sabotage the peace process, to continue to expand occupation, to build additional colonies. Even while Sharon was withdrawing from Gaza in the year 2005, the number of colonists in the occupied Palestinian territory during the year 2005 has actually increased because he withdrew 8,000 colonists from the Gaza Strip, but pushed 20,000 colonists into the West Bank. So he increased the number by 12,000, and that's just something that the media didn't bother covering.
Shir Hever, I want to thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Kayla, for having me.
And thank you for joining us on the Real News Network.
Okay, here's what I think. I feel that they're talking about having Palestine go back to the 67 borders and then adjust it, which means they want to steal more of their land. I feel they should go back to the 1948 borders, because all that land was stolen. Yeah, you had the 67 war, and you had Arabic countries going after Israel, and Israel got rid of them quickly. But land that is taken in wartime is supposed to be returned when the war is over. And so Israel has committed war crimes. They have put so much in the Palestinian territory, which is illegal. Of course, the United States, hey man, that's okay. We don't give a shit. We don't care what the UN says. Every time Israel is condemned by the UN and it goes to the Security Council, the United States vetoes it. In the General Assembly, the United States and Israel both say, no. See, the United States is all for the UN when it affects other countries, but not when it affects the United States or Israel. Israel is a buddy. Actually, the United States is Israel's bitch. And what they need to do is they need to stop apartheid. They need to give Palestinians back their land. And with Jerusalem, originally Jerusalem was according to the plan, Jerusalem was supposed to be an international city. I would say sort of like the Vatican. Jerusalem should be, and its suburbs, should be an international city. It should have each religion, because Jerusalem is a holy land for 3 religions. For Christianity, for Jewish religion, and for Islam. I feel that it should be run by the 3 religions. And I have a feeling that if Israel gets its nose out of things, it would work out pretty well. And as far as the rest of it goes, like I say, should go back to the 1948 borders. Palestine should have its country back. Israel should get the hell out of Palestine. They should get the settlements. As far as the buildings in the settlements, the homes, they should go to the Palestinians whose homes were destroyed. Now, I'm sure that you're thinking, well, yeah, but those people live there now. Well, they aren't supposed to be there. Not their fault, it's Israel's fault. So what they need to do is Israel needs to give them homes that are just like those, but they're in Israel, not in Palestine. Now, if Palestine wants to let Jewish people move in, then that's fine. That's up to Palestine, not up to the Israelis. Another thing that we need to do is stop funding Israel's military. Doesn't make any sense. Stop giving them weapons. Because Israel is the most powerful nation in the Middle East and is fourth most powerful nation militarily in the world. And they don't give a shit about the rest of the world. They don't. What they want to do is they want to take over the Middle East altogether. That's their goal. Now, Ariel Sharon was a killer. Like I say, I equate him pretty much to Hitler. He's a murderer. And he has done more damage to the Palestinians than anyone else. Now, Netanyahu, who's a real Yahoo, is just as bad, I think. But he's dumber than, well, I don't want to say dumber, because Ariel Sharon was fairly intelligent. Netanyahu is a Yahoo. Excuse me, Yahoos, for saying he's a Yahoo, because really he's different. All Netanyahu wants to do is cause problems for Islam, the Islamic people, and the Arabs. He wants to get rid of Iran. And Saudi Arabia wants to get rid of Iran. Both of those countries are harmful to the United States. They are harmful to the Middle East. And they need to be stopped. Now, every country in the United States meddled in their affairs is worse off than they were before the United States meddled in their affairs. The United States needs to settle down. They need to get the hell out of all these other countries' affairs. As far as the military goes, they can cut the military spending in half and still be just as powerful. Just get rid of the waste. Get rid of the waste, and that's half their spending, maybe even more. But that's a different subject. I am worried that Israel is going to start World War III. And I think a lot of people agree with me. And we don't want that. What we need is to have peace. And in order to have peace, we gotta stay out of other countries' affairs. Now, because of the United States, Al-Qaeda has taken over Syria. Al-Qaeda has taken over part of Iraq. Probably what should happen in Syria and Iraq is the Sunnis should have their own country, and the Shiites their own country. And then, split Iraq up. There's 3 major religions there that are Islamic. And go ahead and give them their own countries. Same with Syria. Now, as far as Saudi Arabia, the United States really doesn't need to deal with Saudi Arabia. But they pay our elected officials. So that's why the United States lets them get away with murder. Bahrain, they need to get their military, their naval base out of Bahrain. And maybe even help out the protesters. But no, that's meddling in their affairs. They need to stop giving Saudi Arabia military aid or military help. Stop selling. What we need to do is we need to take these military suppliers and say, look, what we need to do is we need to have peace. Now, the contractors that, for the military and for the NSA and all those people, get rid of them. Fire them. Don't need them. In fact, don't need the NSA. But again, I'm changing the subject. So, what I'm going to do, I think I'm going to end it here. And all I'm going to say is, the U.S. has to stop being purchased by Israel. We need to get rid of the corruption in our country. And Israel is corrupting our country. We need to have Israel become peaceful. We need to have Israel go back to its borders for 1948 borders. We need to let the Palestinians have their country and get Israel out of Palestine. I'm going to close it with the truth. Crimes in Palestine, featuring Anna Baltzer. And I'm hoping that you go to your congressmen, send letters to your representatives, and tell them, stop screwing us up. Stop supporting apartheid. Thank you.
Jewish people deserve deserve human rights just as all people do. But the state of Israel has no right to oppress, rob, and slaughter Palestinians and to deny Palestinians human rights. I mean, everything Israel does, they say they do it for security. Anna, tell them what you think about that.
There's nothing defensive about denying Palestinians water.
Yeah. Not long ago, over 1,000 Palestinians died. About 16 Israelis died. Is that a conflict or a genocide? It's not anti-Semitic, opposing government policies known to be pathetic. Come on. The government doesn't represent the people. Many Israeli activists yell the government is evil. Crusades with modern weapons, they keep making sequels. It's apartheid, you find walls of separation. They used to keep Arabs out of the Jewish nation. But people on both sides oppose the situation. You never know it from the mass media lies, they spread it and censor it. Seek media that's independent, cause the government uses the news to spread their views. It's their spin and they profit off battles that they win. What would you do if you were born in Palestine? Had no way to leave and saw bombs in the sky? Would you fight back or sit and watch your family members die? Why is Israel unaccountable for crimes? They censored Anna Baltzer going on a daily show. They lie and hide those crimes we need to know. Our taxes fund $7 million given daily for building weapons used by the Israeli military. It's not about the Bible or Quran when they bomb. It's about the sickness, the greed for the riches. The government doesn't represent the people and the interests, so the people gotta react with actions to flip this. The witness, end to oppression with quickness. They do it for democracy? That's just a mockery. Like writing the Constitution, owning slaves on their property. They aim to brainwash. Like use main media to blame it all on Hamas. Like when they blame the Indians, they call them militants. Do some due diligence. History is written by who had the biggest weapons. History's his story and how his lies spread it. The media's his tool to keep us fools that's distracted. For truth we buy bombs, it's a con paying taxes. Security or isn't it? Starving Palestinians. Israelis are admitting it, their government committing it. They censored Anna Baltzer going on a daily show. They lie and hide those crimes we need to know. Our taxes fund $7 million given daily for building weapons used by the Israeli military. They say it's separation of church and state, but wait, they created a Jewish state in 1948, but they placed it in a land that was ran by Palestine. Britain didn't care about the Arabs there to die. They conquered it. People lived there, man, it was monstrous. Think what this country did when Britain was on top of it. Needed a one-state solution, a people's revolution, refuting the division of living in separation. For ethnic relations, that only spells devastation. Man, have a revelation. We all humans, that's the same. And no group is prominent. No group should be dominant. Slave trade atrocities were just as bad or worse as the curse of the Nazis. You can't have democracy created by atrocity. It's hypocrisy. Living in a theocracy. I'm tired of the lies, cause they value Jewish lives over Arabs when they die. And they censored Anna Baltzer going on a daily show. They lie and hide those crimes we need to know. Our taxes fund $7 million given daily for building weapons used by the Israeli military. They censored Anna Baltzer going on a daily show. They lie and hide those crimes we need to know. Our taxes fund $7 million given daily for building weapons used by the Israeli military. The apartheid they got going on, it's like the apartheid that happened in South Africa. The apartheid that happened here in the U.S. All groups should be equal and equally accountable to mend the situation and the occupation.
There's nothing defensive about preventing people from having materials to build their homes. So much of the institutions that I understood to be defensive cannot be justified by security anymore. Building a wall between Palestinians and Palestinians.
Check out AnnaInTheMiddleEast.com.
Have a good day, have a good week, a good month, and a good year. Most of all, have a beautiful life. Thank you for being you. TGYA, thank God you're alive.